when somebody goes and does something in the purpose of gaining more financial resources in order to bless others, you have to be very careful about that, because when you start attaching theology to it and start attaching this spiritual component, the idolization that you have of the person that's instructing you that gaining more financial influence is okay, since you idolize that mentor that is stating that, it will cause you to disregard over time all the little steps you start to take in your descension into hell when it comes to your opinion of having a corrupt heart that was caused to be tainted through the acquiring of mass riches. Right? Good morning. Welcome to the Frequency and Faith channel. My name's Cody. The last episode I left off on the verse, I think it was verse, 3 or 4 in Judges chapter 17, and we were discussing how Micah's mother took something, a resource that was stolen from her by her son, and dedicated that to God by stating in verse 3, it starts and says, "When he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a cast idol. I will give it back to you." I was indicating how that was odd, using the verbiage "give it back to you," because that frames this resource that was stolen from her as belonging to the person that stole it initially. Like when you give something back to somebody, I believe that was used to indicate what can happen when corruption in a culture is so invasive to a person that it will turn their value system on its head. And so today I'm going to pick up on Judges chapter 17. I'll start at verse 3, the one that I just read, and I will read all the way through to the end of verse 5. So without further ado, Judges chapter 17, verse 3. When he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a cast idol. I will give it back to you. So he returned the silver to his mother, and she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, who made them into the image and the idol, and they were put in Micah's house. Now this man named Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some idols, and installed one of his sons as his priest. In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. And again, that last phrase, in those days Israel had no king, everyone did as he saw fit, is used throughout the book of Judges over and over. It represents the state of anarchy of the times. One thing I found striking about dedicating this resource in the act of melting it down or giving it to a silversmith in order to create a cast idol, which is a form of blasphemy or heresy, I would say, right? Obviously, God doesn't want us to worship false idols and to give our attention to things that are not of him. And I was thinking about it. How many things in my life I have dedicated to God or done in the name of God that was actually just fueled by my own self-fulfilling desires and selfishness. And it's not uncommon when you really think about it. I know there's many people in life that think that they're doing the right thing, but then when they look back in time, they realize, oh, this is really stupid. And the same thing goes when you're trying to walk out your faith in a manner that would be pleasing to God, right? So when you read about these things that these people have done and you think to yourself, that's absolutely insane. I don't understand how they could do them. It's easy to gather that when you're reading the text from your comfortable chair or seat. But if you take a moment and look back in your own life and your past, there's still times, even I'm sure I'm doing it now. I'm doing something in the name of God, either spiritually or psychologically or philosophically or anything. And really it's going against what he wants me to be doing. And that is, I think, part of being imperfect. To the topic of the video, or these videos, this series more or less, is that's also something that happens when we are in a culture that is plagued with corruption, which we most definitely are. I truly believe that. I know that. I think everyone knows that deep down. There's problems. There's fissures in the landscape, and we can feel it as we interact with each other. We can feel it when we go online, when we see things. I think the things that we fall into the habit of praising all the time online are very similar to the act of this mother praising her son for returning the stolen gold to her. Over time, we grow numb to the things that we would have looked at and labeled as selfish, right? And the things that we used to label as selfish or maybe being self-centered are now titled as being self-empowering or fueling a sort of self-love, and this is going to better the world. There's so many posts that I see in the digital landscape that are instantiated under the guise of being selfless and for the better of humanity. But we know deep down that when you're posting those things, we know that when we get a like on those posts, we feel good about it, which isn't necessarily wrong. But I do know, I, I know, even from experience myself, this is part of the reason why I pulled away from social media is I didn't like when someone liked my posts because it would fulfill me in a way that I knew subconsciously over time it would start to tilt my desire for interaction with others in a way that was trending me towards selfishness and wanting to please myself before I pleased others. It was tainting the reason that I started creating the post in the first place. It was creating an idol for me to worship. And that idol would have been attention. That's a metaphor that I stumbled upon when I was thinking about this verse and this interaction here. Attention seems to be a really highly sought after resource or a sought after currency. It's pretty similar to this interaction here. We give attention to people in the digital landscape, whether it's on social media or YouTube or wherever. Even in real life, we pay attention to people, we give them our time. I believe over time that starts to create this idol, right? You start getting attached to the influencers that you really resonate with. That isn't wrong at its core. There are people that God will place in your life or people that seems to, speak to something that's deeply rooted in your soul. And you start to water the seeds that are embedded in the soil of your heart, and you can start to feel the plants or whatever crop it is grow within you, right? And that gives you this sort of jolt of energy and jolt of satisfaction. Or maybe your life is wretched. You can't stand the job you have. You can't stand the things that you think about. And there's some sort of content online that takes you away from that place. It transports you to another place psychologically. Either way, all of it costs time and attention when you're viewing it. And just like this interaction here, that time and attention is then given to some other external place or person. In this verse, it was a silversmith. They use that to create what then becomes an idol to you. It's then placed in your house, just like in verse 4 here. Or again, it says, so after he returned the silver to his mother, she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, who used them to make the idol, and it was put in Micah's house. That's exactly what happens when we're online. We get into this repetitive cycle where we're giving these people our attention. I know it's probably ironic for me to say this because I'm uploading things to YouTube, but I never want there to be a day ever where somebody 100% wholly depends upon me to receive their word from God or receive their guidance in life or think that I am the wisest person on earth. I never want that to happen. I never want to be some sort of idol to somebody that pulls away from what God is wanting them to do. Because I only can see things from my perspective, and I'm wrong about things all the time. Therefore, when you have these people on the internet or wherever, even in real life, their perspective has been built up over time through their experiences and the variables that they have psychologically, which are also built up through experiences in life or through biology with people receiving certain inherited genes from, their family. We have all these unique variables that make up our perspectives and opinions. And your leader or mentor is not any different than that. Therefore, if you start to idolize these people, you'll start to forget that just like you, the way that they see the world is unique to them, and they are apt to miss things. They are apt to make mistakes. Therefore, there are some things that you are destined to see that your mentor will never see or never feel in the same way when you interact with that thing, that subject matter, that topic, ever. And they're not supposed to, which that introduces a big question as to what am I missing if I take my own philosophies and I model them after a certain person in a way that cuts me off to any sort of unique way that I would see the world. And I think when you're first starting out to better improve yourself and to get on the right path in life, so to speak, it's advantageous to actually adopt a full, I would say, template of somebody else's philosophies or habits, even disciplines. Because if you don't know anything, you at least need a reference guide, which in Christianity, our reference guide is Jesus and how he interacted with the world. And I would say the stories and depictions in this text here, the Bible. Obviously, God wanted us to read the word because it's stated in here a bunch of times how important this text is. And it's a form of how he speaks to us. But there's also times when God will speak through the world and other people. And that's when we can fall into the creation of idols through the spending of our attention and focus and time on other people. And people fall into this subconsciously. They'll just get their favorite pastor or favorite leader. They'll shut everything off. They'll be like, if my pastor didn't say that, it's not good, right? And they'll constantly be, which I was about to say they'll constantly be comparing things to things that their mentor has said. And if they don't find that it falls into something that their mentor would agree with or find true, they'll just discard it. Well, what if it's something that their unique psychological makeup was never supposed to render to them as true for their own given world and space that God has made prevalent to them in order for them to interact with, which then by extension will further his kingdom? Maybe they're not wired that way. They're not supposed to think that way. So that's something to be mindful of. And that's something, again, that spans across influencers, your friends, your boss at work, people that you want to learn from because you deem them successful. And it's a very slippery slope. It's one I have fallen into many times. Another point that I sort of stumbled upon in the dark was maybe one that was a bit more obvious, but the act of taking this silver and melting it down into something that now will become an idol is very similar to people that pay for self-development groups. Or it can, I should say, I'll preface this, it can be similar to when you pay for something such as like a self-development group with the intentions of bringing to fruition something that you believe God wants you to do. So again, you're going through these actions which are in the name of God, just like stated in this story. So you'll be doing something in the name of God and you'll take money to pay for it to get it somewhere. And what can happen is now that you have that resource that has been melted down, it can take the original reason that you entered that group and it can taint it and corrupt it with the desire to gain that resource that you just spent in order to be there. Because a lot of people believe they're brought to this world in order to be financially successful and then bless others through their pool of resources now, which would be, in this case, silver. I know many people that are like that, especially in churches that have pastors that state that money is an evil or anything else, which I agree with. I think it's just a tool. Yet I do know in Deuteronomy chapter 17, which is written about the time where the Israelites were freed from slavery and they were going to go into the promised land. And God speaks to them about the future. God is telling them there will be a day that you have kings, which God was kind of opposed to that idea anyway, because he should have been their king and they should have been disciplined and faithful enough to just follow his commands that were given to them through Moses. But he knows that they're going to fall short and fail. Therefore, there's this passage in the chapter of Deuteronomy, chapter 17, verses 14 through 20, which states these commands that are supposed to be given to these future kings. God knows that they're going to create that position. They're going to call for a king. How that plays out in the future is Samuel, who is a prophet from God. He's the one that actually anoints David and Saul, which are their first kings. And when they ask for a king, this is right after this story that I'm reading you now. The Israelites are like, we need a king, right? We've been living in anarchy forever. We need guidance. Samuel understands that this is going to be a bad idea because kings can be corrupt. And he's like, no, you shouldn't do that. But God knows that the Israelites are going to go off the intended path, and therefore he's stating, when you do have a king, these are the commandments that you need the king to recite every day because they're so important. And one of them is the king shall not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. It states that black and white. Therefore, if God is stating that, even though this is the Old Testament, and I know after Jesus came, some things are changed, he must have put it there for a reason in the Bible, because Money can corrupt people. We all know this. We all know of people that have been corrupted by money. And to make this full circle, when somebody goes and does something in the purpose of gaining more financial resources in order to bless others, you have to be very careful about that, because when you start attaching theology to it and start attaching this spiritual component, wow, I just realized this. The idolization that you have of the person that's instructing you that gaining more financial influence is okay, since you idolize that mentor that is stating that, it will cause you to disregard over time all the little steps you start to take in your descension into hell when it comes to your opinion of having a corrupt heart that was caused to be tainted through the acquiring of mass riches, right? And then the thing that you were trying to do when you entered this self-development group or whatever it is that you had to pay to get into, and now you have this debt that you have to pay off, and you believe God not only to pay for that debt but give you overflow that you can then bless others through. That's what I hear all the time in churches, that your blessing is going to have an overflow to it, and then the runoff you can just bless the world with it, right? Which is, that can be true, but when it comes to financial resources, it's a slippery slope, because you can start idolizing the resource, and it can tilt the posture of your heart to make you forget about why you originally even wanted to have the resource to begin with. I think this takes place a lot in many different facets of the Christian community, online community, everywhere. It's like, it's very similar. Something just popped in my head just now too. When a pastor or a leader of, say, a self-development group or something, if they are not open to say that if you don't find anything helpful in this group for a set amount of time, you should go somewhere else because God has something else for you. If they're not open to saying that, that's a huge red flag for me. One of the greatest things I've ever heard from a pastor ever was a pastor actually right here in the Omaha area. It's in Plattsmouth, Nebraska. And he said, he was talking about his church members and how there's a frequency for his members to go to another church and leave to another church. And he said, I don't care myself. What did he say? How he said it was beautiful. He said, I don't care where you get it as long as you get it. Talking about the word, talking about the instantiation of the curiosity that pulls you forth through the darkness to seek God's word, to seek his truth, to seek a greater relationship with him. The pastor was saying he doesn't care where you get it as long as you get it. That has to be one of the greatest things I've ever heard a pastor say, or any leader of anything ever. That is completely selfless, and it is true. It's true. Therefore, if you are a part of a group where the leader doesn't say, hey, if you're not getting anything out of this, leave, which, as I say that, what I would really suggest people to do is pray to God and ask him first. Filter it through the word first, whatever God's given you, and then make a decision based on that. Like I said many times before, if your value hierarchy does not have God at the top, you will be filtering things through a human mind, which that can happen subconsciously when you start turning your leaders into idols, and you can start filtering things through their opinion and their perspective before God's, or the feeling of the absence in their heart of curiosity when it comes to seeking the truth in their life, which could lead them to the next thing that they're supposed to do and would cause them to find out that they need to leave a land that they're in, just like the Abrahamic call in Genesis when God calls to Abraham and says, leave everything you know, go to a land where I will show you. That's not telling him where he will go, but that's just him saying, come forth. I'm going to lead you somewhere. Take my hand. Come. Just like Jesus telling Peter to come onto the water. Walk on the water, just as I am. Keep your eyes on me. And again, in that iteration, I love it when Peter puts his focus on something else, he starts sinking. You can trick yourself through the idolization of your mentors and pastors into thinking that your eyes are on Jesus, but your eyes are really just on a human resource, okay? Just on another man, which I don't say that in a demeaning sense. I myself am just another man. Or if you idolize a woman, which that is I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole, through the means of OnlyFans and the worship of beauty, which that can be, man, that can be corrupted too. Obviously, we live in a culture today that idolizes beauty, and it's so interesting to me because I have fallen into that trap in the past many, many times. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life through being intimate with a partner when I shouldn't have, having sex before marriage. Like now I'm single and I'm seeing all these things that I've done in the past and I've paid for them dearly. And I still struggle with things, right? Thinking about things that I've done or dealing with the structures that I have made or the idols that I have made over time through my actions and my experiences in life in that certain area. And that's something you can take away from this is the things that you do in the past, you have to tear down those idols in your heart. And sometimes you'll forget that they're even idols. You'll start to think that your behavior, which is a result of that thing being built in the first place and being still present in your heart, even if it's like deep, deep, deep in the backwoods of your heart where you can't even see it or sense it anymore, your behavior is still being influenced by it until you go back and address it, which I read a lot of psychology books, and a lot of them have to do with discovering these things that are still plaguing your mind, right? Whether that be through dreams or maybe counseling through another person and you talk them out. And that all comes from the idolization of some sort of idea that you have in your head that really isn't of God, but it came here from the earth. An idea of having a perfect relationship because that's what it was like in a movie that you've seen through cinema and theatrics. It was told to you to be valuable. The engaging of a relationship in the manner that you have seen through the screen. And that has taken us down a path of idolizing celebrities who are sometimes chosen for their physical aesthetics. And now we're in a day and age where loneliness is more prevalent than ever, depression is more prevalent than ever. And that also has to do with idolism. In wrapping this up, I say all of this to state be mindful of where your focus is taking you. Be cognizant of how your heart is postured. Don't be afraid to take a step back and think to yourself, am I really filtering everything through God first? Am I reliant on human resources for the word of God? I know the Bible was written by humans, but I obviously think that gets a pass. But that's also why we have prayer and why you have to build a relationship with the Bible, just like it's another human being. Don't be afraid to be analytical on your own actions and your own patterns of thinking. When I try to decide what to do or when I'm going down the path to the land where God is calling me, what is the first thing I filter it through? And how do I validate that sort of philosophy that I come away with when I engage in that assessment of the action or of the sort of revelatory moment that led me to this area that springboarded me to the next area? And I feel this is the land that God will show me. This is what he was talking about. When really, maybe it's just where your mentor wanted you to be because that's what they're uniquely wired to see as valuable. Maybe God has something else for you. And if you don't monitor that over time, you can fall into the act of self worship, into idolization, into the worshiping of false gods, the worshiping of the spirits of greed and dictatorship, I would say. God knows where he's taking you and God knows where he's going. And I also want to end this with saying that there's nothing wrong with having a mentor. You should have one. But you should be mindful to filter everything through God first. Seek his word and his wisdom. And don't ever be 100% fully reliant on an imperfect human. They can make mistakes too, but God can't. And he's given us the Bible to cross-reference, and he's given us the example of Jesus interacting with this world for us to strive towards. And we're never going to hit it, but at least when we're aiming for it, we can exhaust our ability to get as close as we can get to Jesus in regard to his standard of living or interacting with other humans and selflessly leading and loving others. That will always render our life as better than it was when we started, 100%. And so I'm going to stop there today. And that was, man, I've been recording now for a while. And again, I thank you so much for your time. God loves you. I'll be back on recording tomorrow. I think probably tomorrow. I don't want to say things I can't follow through on. I don't know how I'm going to release these. I think I'm going to just dedicate one day of the week to edit all of this material and then have them scheduled to upload. I don't know the upload frequency I'm going to strive for yet. I'm going to practice when I'm preaching, and I'll be asking God for guidance first, right? Yeah. So, till next time.